Okay, folks, we do most of our configurations from, or the mode that we have to go to first before we do most of our configurations. So, to go up one mode, I'm going to type configure terminal. Now, I don't have to type in the whole command. I can just type in config and the letter T, space, and then the letter T, hit enter, and it will work. So when I type in configure terminal and hit enter, it takes me to global configuration mode. I repeat, this mode is called the global configuration mode. Any changes made to the router or the switch or the Cisco device from this mode will affect the device as a whole. Later on, today or tomorrow, you will see that I can change or make configuration changes to parts of a router from other modes. However, any changes I make to the Cisco device from this mode, or the router in this case, from this mode, will affect the router as a whole. Now, to go back from config mode to priv mode, I can type in exit. Okay, so I showed you that I can type exit and go back. Now, let's go back to config mode. So as I said, I can just type CONFIG and then the letter T, and it'll take me back to config mode. Or I could type end. That too will take me back to privilege mode. So once again, I'm going to go back to config mode or global configuration mode. So the two commands that take me back are either exit or end or control Z. So this is control Z right here. Control Z will do the same. It will take me back all the way to priv mode. Now, what is the difference between exit and end? I will show you in a little bit. Control Z, however, is the same as end. Control Z and end take me, no matter where I am, back all the way to priv mode. So let me go back to config mode or global config mode. And the first command I'm going to show you is how to assign the router a name. So I'm going to assign, since this is router 1, we see this is R1, I'm going to assign it a name of router 1. So the command is host name followed by whatever you're going to name the device. I'm going to say lowercase r and then 1. And when I hit enter, you notice that the prompt changed from router config # to R1 config #. So at this point, I have changed the router name. Now, I'm going to exit out, go back to priv mode, because I want to show you something, and type in some gibberish. Let's say I was going to type in configure terminal, and I misspell it. So for some reason, I misspelled configure terminal, and I hit enter. It actually did not do what I was expecting it to do. So let's just type in gibberish, and we will see that. Just pretend that this is a mistype. Okay, so that's what I wanted it to do. You see that this 255, 255, 255, 255, we haven't covered IP addressing yet, but I'm telling you right now, and take my word for it, this is a broadcast message. A broadcast message is sent from one device to everybody, as I mentioned earlier. And here it says domain server. So what this device or this router is actually doing, when you fat finger a command or when you mistype a command, The router actually thinks that it is a domain name. Now, what is a domain name? If I were to ask you, give me the IP address, and again, keeping in mind, you don't know how IP addressing works, but give me the IP address. An IP address is an address that routers use to get you places, to get you to websites, to get you to servers, to get you to other networks. So let's say I ask you, what is the IP address for google.com? You wouldn't know because you have never had to type in the IP address for google.com in your browser to get to google.com. You simply know the words Google or www.google.com. Those words, www.google.com, is a domain name. And when you type in www.google.com in your browser, your PC actually sends out a request on the network looking for a server that has in its database stored www.google.com and the IP address associated with that domain name. So your PC actually sends out a request called a domain name request to the domain name server, which is holding the binding between google.com and its IP address. And it asks the domain name server, hey, I need to go to google.com. Could you please return me back the IP? Once that server returns you back the IP or you machine the IP, then you go to google.com. Now, when I fat finger a command or I type in some gibberish, which is supposed to simulate me mistyping, your router actually sends out a domain server request asking, hey, who is the guy on this network here that is holding all the bindings between domain names and IP addresses? So this guy actually is looking for a domain server. Now, in this lab, we don't have a domain server. So we need to turn this feature off. Otherwise, every time I'm sitting here and I mistype a command, we're going to see this. And this doesn't go away for a while, about, I think, 60 seconds. Now, I'm not going to sit here in 60 seconds of silence to make this go away. But just in case, out of frustration, you hit enter a few times and you can hear me hitting enter, this will do a domain server search for every enter key that you have pressed, which 60 seconds per key is really annoying. So what we do is we press Control, Shift, and 6. Once again, that is Control, Shift, and 6 at the same time, and look what it says. That is the break sequence. It says name lookup aborted. However, how about we not have this happen in the first place? That would be nice. So all configuration changes that apply to the whole router are done from config mode. To go to config mode, I type in configure terminal. I hit enter. Now I'm in config mode because my prop changed to config. And I'm going to say no IP domain dash lookup. So no IP domain hyphen lookup. And I hit enter. And that should have turned off my domain server search for when I mistype a command. So let's test it out. I'm going to exit out back to privilege mode. I'm going to type some gibberish again and hit enter. And we find that this time, instead of doing a domain lookup or sending out a broadcast looking for a domain name server, it just simply says unknown command or computer name or unable to find computer address. It just simply does not do the domain server search. Okay, I'm going to go back to my config mode. The next command we're going to see is how to set a password. Now, these devices control traffic between organizations. These devices control traffic between, let's say, your organization and a bank or two hospitals. And it is very easy for somebody to log into this device and just simply erase it. and take down that link between, let's say, two hospitals. That could spell disaster for a lot of doctors and a lot of patients. So these devices need to be password protected. The first password we're going to set is the password required to go from user mode to privilege mode, called the enable password. So the command for that is enable space password space, if I say question mark, if I use the help feature at this point, it is asking me, do I need to set a level? Don't worry about this. This is asking me if I want to set a password for privilege mode 10, for example, or John's privilege level that we were talking about for mode 14. We're not going to go into that. The next thing it's asking me for is line. So a clear text password. So let's go ahead and type in a password and we'll keep it simple. We'll say Cisco and hit enter. So at this point, the enable password or the password to go from privilege mode to enable mode should be set to Cisco. Let's test it out. A good rule of thumb, guys. When you make a change on a Cisco device, immediately make sure that change works. So one change followed by one test. Another change followed by another test. Don't make 10 changes to a router and then go start testing, because then you don't know which one of those changes caused for the test to fail. Then you basically have to one by one remove all the changes till it fixes itself. You're creating more work for yourself. Test the change immediately after you make it. So if it doesn't work, you know what command caused the problem. It was the one you did right before you started testing. So I'm going to test this. I'm going to say exit. I'm going to exit out, back to priv mode. Then I'm going to say disable, which gets me back to user mode. So keep track as you watch this video of the prompt. When I said exit, took me from config mode to priv mode. When I said disable, took me from priv mode, which with the pound sign, to the greater than sign, which is user mode. As I work through these labs with you, always keep track of the prompt. That's how you know where you are. Now, we set a password right here. Enable password Cisco. So when I try to execute the enable command, or when I try to go from user mode to privilege mode, it should ask me for a password. And I say enable, and I hit enter, and huzzah. It asked me for a password, which I set to the word Cisco. So let's type in Cisco and hit enter. Now, a word of warning. When you're typing in your passwords, type in, let's say it's Cisco, type in CISCO, enter. If you, by accident, say CISCO space enter, your password is going to be Cisco space enter. And when you later on are looking at your passwords, you can't see that enter or that space. And you assume your password is Cisco, and for some reason you cannot log into your router because Cisco won't work. Be careful with that. If you hit enter, that space key is part of the password. So, once again, disable, go back to priv mode. When I try and enable and go back to user mode, it asks me for a password. And I set it to Cisco, which we did with the command enable password Cisco. Moving on. Now, remember I said a router has 3 types of memories. The first one I covered was your random access memory, or your RAM. And in your RAM, you store your current running config, or your running configuration, the configuration changes that you have made right now. I haven't saved the changes I've made yet. I've made 2 changes. I've created a password for the enable or priv mode, and I have changed the router hostname to R1 from just router, from the word router. These changes are reflected in your running configuration. If at this point I power cycle the router, these passwords and this hostname will be gone because they only reside in my running configuration, which is in my RAM. So, shall we test this out? Well, why not? I'm going to power cycle my router with the reload command. And I'm going to confirm. Now remember, I haven't saved my password and I haven't saved my hostname. What happened? I had nothing in my startup config, which is NVRAM. I had not transferred the contents of my running config or RAM to my startup config or NVRAM or non-volatile RAM. Since I had not done the transfer or the save, I come back with a blank router. I'm going to quickly bring it back to where we were. So I hit Control-C to pop out of the initial dialog. And I'm going to give it a host name, R1, enable password, Cisco, and no IP domain lookup. So these are the changes we had made up until now. And we are back to where we were. Oops, I named it R2. Let me fix that. Host name. See, I don't have to type in the whole command. The least amount of letters that makes a command unique will work. So the only command that starts with the letters HOST is the command hostname. Even HOS, I believe, works. So the letters HOS make the command hostname unique, because since it's the only command that exists with the first three letters HOS. And I can say R1 and R2, if you keep your eye on it, will change to R1. All right, so let's look at our running configuration, or our RAM. Show running config. I could have just said show RUN, and it would have worked just the same. Because, once again, to ram the point home, if I say show run and question mark, the only command that exists with the first three letters RUN is the command running config. I'm going to hit enter, and here are the changes we have made. It says hostname R1, enable password Cisco. I believe the no IP domain lookup command is here. These other commands are there by default, so don't worry about them right now. We will look at them later. But the three changes I've made, hostname R1, enable password Cisco, and no IP domain lookup. Now, is it a good thing that I see my password right here on screen when I look at my running configuration by executing the command show running config? Nope, that's not a good thing. What if you're at work and you're looking at your running config, or you have executed the command show running config, and somebody that doesn't like you is standing behind you drinking coffee, and they see that your password is Cisco, and then you walk away from your table to go get coffee or use the restroom or whatever, and they log into your router because they dislike you, executing your password, and then they erase the router. Who's in trouble? You are, because the last password used to log into the router was yours. You are responsible for your own password, so this is not a good thing. So we're going to go ahead and encrypt this password. So once again, I'm going to go into my global config mode with the command configure terminal. And from tomorrow on, I'm going to start shortening these commands to config T. Right now, these commands are new to you, so I'm making sure I type the whole thing out. And I'm going to execute the command enable secret, and then followed by a password. So I'm going to say enable secret. Let's make it Bob. Why not? We just need a word. So enable secret Bob. Now, let's look at our running config. And let's see if we can see Mr. Bob here. So, how do we look at our running config? we execute the command show running config. And I hit enter. Now, the previous password we had was Cisco, which is your unencrypted password. We can still see that. The other password, Bob, you see this line of gibberish? That's Bob. Poor Bob. Anyways, that is our encrypted password. So when we executed the command enable secret, we are creating an encrypted password, something that somebody standing behind you as you look at your running config can't figure out. So I don't know anybody that can look at this line and come up with Bob on the spot. Now, this password uses the number 5, stands for Message Digest 5, or MD5. It uses the MD5 algorithm or encryption method, which is a pretty strong encryption. It takes years to break. Now, we can, as you see, we can still see Cisco. So let's test out to see which one of these passwords actually works. So I'm going to say disable and go back to priv mode. And now I'm going to try and get back into my, I'm going to say disable, sorry, and go back to user mode with the greater than sign. And now I'm going to try and get back into my privilege mode. So to get back to privilege mode, I type in enable, hit enter, and I get prompted for a password. I'm going to try Cisco first. C-I-S-C-O, enter. Nothing. Let's try Bob. And it worked. So the fact that somebody standing behind you can visually see Cisco doesn't help them now, does it? They can type Cisco all they want to try and log into your router. It won't work. The one that'll work is the encrypted one. Now, at your work, you're not actually going to set an enable password. You're just going to set an enable secret. The reason I showed you this is because it's part of the exam and part of the course. But the general practice is you don't even set an enable password and then the password. You just set an enable secret and then the password.